Hello, this is Margaret Ajibade, the STEM Positive Disruptor. And on today, I have a special guest on Mia's conversation, Sheri Byrne-Haber. And she's a senior staff architect with VMware. She's a specialist in accessibility, which she'll tell us more about. And the reason why we set up this platform is to educate, raise awareness, change people's perception, and demystify what STEM is, that science, technology, engineering, mathematics. It's about showcasing what is happening within our industry, but also to introduce more young people to come on board, but also change how things are being done, because we are here to provide solutions. And today I have a special guest who's doing great things where accessibility is concerned. And without further ado, welcome again, Cheryl. Thank you so much for coming on board. Please tell us more
I
about
appreciate the
yourself.
invitation. Thanks, Margaret.
No problem. Please tell us more about yourself.
So I kind of have a multidisciplinary background. I started off with a degree in computer science and then ended up going to law school, which is not a particularly common combination. And then after that, I got an MBA, and I have a lifelong mobility disability. I use a wheelchair to get around longer distances. And people assume when they see the wheelchair, oh, that's why she got into accessibility, because she uses a wheelchair. And actually, I got into accessibility because I have a child who's deaf. And so, to me, the wheelchair is just a way of getting from point A to point B. The disability isn't the chair. The disability is when there are stairs and no ramp. Or when I was in London last, the subway stations with no elevators. So I started doing that about, I think I'm going on 17 years now. That I've been working on specifically in disability inclusion, digital accessibility, and the intersection between technology and disability.
I'm so impressed because you had this book which you did, which is called "Giving a Damn About Accessibility," and it's so powerful and so strong. And I think everyone should really read that because it makes a difference. Because sometimes, as you're saying, people assume that just because you're like this or you're doing certain things, it's because of what they think they physically see. But your driver was to deal with your daughter that was deaf, and you knew the limitations of what the hindrances were, and that forced you in a way to start finding ways to make your daughter's life much more
exactly. And sometimes you'll fight for your children in a way that you won't necessarily fight for yourself.
Exactly.
So that to me was a very powerful motivating factor. But people don't realize 70% of disabilities are invisible. Okay, so that includes things like color blindness and dyslexia and mental health conditions. There are famous actors and actresses that have invisible disabilities. And then in the workplace, on top of that, only 40% of employees will tell their employers that they have a disability. 60% are trying to hide it. So that's the other thing. People are concerned about active discrimination. They think they'll be singled out if they request accommodations. And my goal is to build an environment where that doesn't happen.
So true. And I do love what you're saying, and I think you're quite right, because I think people are not intentionally trying to discriminate, but we do. It's one of those things that happens, and it's like we normalize it. And I love the fact that you're changing that by what you're doing with those companies that you're bringing, getting them to understand the reason why they need to make it more accessible and more inclusive, to adapt to suit the general public, because we all know that there's such diverse people, as you said, disability is not always visible. The invisible ones are the ones that sometimes do need that help, because they have the ability to do the job, but they need that extra help or support to be able to do them to be more effective. I do want to say,
and that's actually where the title of my book came from, because it's like, okay, the solutions are there. All you have to do is care about it. But I chose a slightly more provocative way to say you just need to care about it a little bit.
But it's true though, and I think this is why I applaud you. I love you challenging our way of thinking. I love the idea that you want to get people to start thinking not just about themselves, because some people get so comfortable in our norm, whatever that defined as norm is. And I think what you're doing, not I think what you are doing is challenge that norm and make it more, how do you say, inclusive and it's more accessible for everyone. And this is so important. And I do love the idea. I do love what LinkedIn did. They made you, you're the game changer in many ways. The top voice, the social impact 2022. But also, there's so many things you have done. How you're making a difference in big companies as well, getting them to think out of the box and what you're challenging them. So I want to just go back slightly to where you started off with when your daughter, you had your daughter and you realized that she was being limited by this, and the setup wasn't conducive for her to grow in the way you like it to. So how did you bring out that the driver then set you off to a new way of getting challenging the system itself to be aware of what they need to do? So how did you come about doing that?
Well, I started in just generic disability inclusion. I worked for a nonprofit for several years where, because I was a lawyer, where I got into discussions or mediations or litigation, largely for students with disabilities with specific learning needs that weren't being provided by the schools. But then also, we have this stupid for-profit medical system in the United States. And so people frequently get turned down for treatment related to their disabilities. And so there's this appeals process, and I helped people specifically with hearing loss through the appeals process. And we have this thing in the US called class action lawsuits. And a class action lawsuit is when you're suing not just for you, but for everybody like you. And I did win a class action lawsuit against the largest insurer in the United States. And then all of a sudden, people weren't getting denied that treatment anymore. And so my caseload went down about 95% in the span of 2 months, because the insurers, since they lost the litigation, they had to provide the service. And so that was just when digital accessibility was coming out. And so I thought, you know what, I'll dust off my computer science degree and I'll start working in making technology work better for people with disabilities. But we're in this amazing era right now where in the last, I want to say 14 months, speech recognition in particular has gotten so much better. Machine learning is something that we can now apply to accessibility testing. And then, I'm starting to experiment now with ChatGPT, where people with dyslexia, for example, can put information into ChatGPT and have it generated back out to them in a way that they can more easily understand it.
Do you know that I do it's quite I love the fact that you're not, I mean, of course you were a computer scientist, that's where you got your first degree, and then you became a lawyer. And marrying those two together has made a difference, because it enables you understand the technical scene, but also know the legality of things, which means that you're
I'm the translator, right? I can explain things, from the legal perspective, from the perspective of a person with a disability, from the business perspective. I've had situations where developers, I ask them to do something and they'll be like, oh my God, that's so hard. That's going to take 6 weeks. And my response quite frequently is, would you like me to code that for you? Because what they're doing is they're not wanting to learn the topic deep enough to actually understand it and apply it everywhere. And because I understand how to implement it, I also understand how long it's going to take.
Of course. And that's I seriously, you're what I would call a package, a very positive package, because you're making that change. And I think sometimes, you talk about getting someone to change something and they're already making excuses why they can't do it. And the thing is, because of your understanding and your background, it allows you to be challenge that, mate, and get them to start doing things which they will normally say, well, we can't because of this, because of that. And your background allows you to make that change in such a positive way. And that's,
I am a bit of a unicorn in terms of my background, but I always tell people you don't have to have a computer science degree or a legal degree to raise your hand in a project meeting and say, hey, how is somebody with a disability going to use this, right?
indeed.
All you have to do is ask the question, which goes back to the title of my book. All you have to do is care a little bit and understand what the possibilities are and understand the impact of being exclusionary, even if it's not intentional. The impact is the same.
Indeed, yeah. And I do love that. And I know, as you're saying, we're in this perfect world now. Well, not perfect, but at least where it's technology evolving. There's so many programs out there that now more supportive of people with disability, seen and unseen. But based on your experience and based on what you're doing, because you're doing great work, not just in the US, I think people know you quite well across where accessibility is concerned, and I can see that. But what do you think we're still lacking in? And because we talk about I'm grateful for the solutions that are being provided, but what are the things that you feel still is lacking, or we're still struggling with that idea of change? Is it to do with people's perception or thinking, or is it to do with the actual tools that we use? What would you say is still something we're still, well, is it still an issue?
I think there's two things that I can highlight, that if you have these two things, your accessibility program is probably going to be more successful. The first thing is we don't have enough people with disabilities who are in full employment. The unemployment rate in the US for people with disabilities is double the unemployment rate for people without disabilities. And so there's some discrimination issues pertaining to hiring practices. And then there's also educational issues where people with disabilities aren't offered always the same educational opportunities as people without disabilities. So that's number one. I think an employer really needs to assess, how do we recruit? How do we onboard? How do we retain people with disabilities? Because even if you have a large accessibility team, and VMware's accessibility team is fairly large, we have 20 people on it, we're still not going to be in every room where the conversations need to be had. We need to have people who are willing to speak up about accessibility on our behalf when we're not there. And you do that by having more employees with disabilities. The second thing that sometimes is a problem is there's this disconnect between leadership's words and leadership's actions. Nobody gets up on a stage and says, I don't care about people who are blind. Everybody says, oh, disability inclusion is important, accessibility is important. But then if you're underfunding it in your corporation, or you're prioritizing features over accessibility, that ends up being a problem in the actual implementation, because the actions don't meet the words.
Of course.
So those are the two things that if you can get around those two problems, you can definitely make a lot of progress with respect to accessibility, not just for what you're selling, but for how you're operating as an organization. And there's a couple of fairly well-known studies that say, if you do a good job at disability inclusion in your organization, your profits, for example, are going to be like 1/3 higher. Your return on investment is going to be higher. So there's actually a financial number objectively that you can put. You have to spend some money to do it, but the payoff on the back end is also significant.
Indeed. And
nobody expects it to be done as a charity in the corporate world, especially not in the US.
Indeed. I mean, well, yes. I mean, you're quite right there. But you made a point about the profit margin where it increases. But this is something, if you look at it from the gender perspective, we've had that before, where as well, if you do this, you should do that. But people struggle. They all say the right things, but when it comes to the actual tangible implementation of it, they're lagging behind. So, you work with VMware, and you're very much a staff architect, or senior staff architect, you're saying, and you do accessibility. How have you been able to get them to start thinking in that way, to bring that change? Because really, what we're saying is that if they can do it, surely other organizations can pick up on the idea that, hold on, there's an organization, they're quite big corporate companies, so anyone can be able to gain ideas from them that this is actually a possible way forward.
Yeah, so I founded the accessibility program at VMware 4.5 years ago.
Okay.
And then just coming up on 4 years, I also founded the VMware Disability Employee Resource Group. So employee resource groups are very important to people with disabilities.
Mm-hmm.
It's important to understand that disability is intersectional. Anybody can become disabled at any time. If you are not disabled this second, chances of you being disabled in the future are quite high, right? Because disability is also frequently associated with age, but there can be accidents and what have you. So so that's one way I've been able to do it. We did something called the Disability Equity Index. And that comes from a group called Disability In, and we assessed everything at VMware pertaining to disability. And over a couple of years period of time, we eventually got a 100% score and was named a best place to work for disability.
Wow.
So one of the things that was critical to doing that was passing an internal accessibility policy. So not only do we look at the accessibility of what we sell, we also look at the accessibility of what we buy. Because our disabled employees aren't going to be effective if we buy inaccessible products.
It's very true. Very, very true. Very, very true. So did you get the buy-in from the management itself?
Yes. So we had originally a VP of a particular business unit who created my job description and allocated the budget for me to be hired. And then I went around and convinced all the general managers of all the business units that this was something that we needed to fund. And the internal accessibility policy is actually sponsored by our Chief Information Officer. And currently, my role comes under the Chief Technology Officer for the entire company. So we do have buy-in at quite senior levels. And I think that's, as I mentioned, making sure that the words match the actions at the leadership level. You just won't have a successful accessibility program without that.
So true. So true. I'm really impressed. And I'm very impressed with what VMware is doing as well. The fact that they took, it's not a risk, it's something that should have been done a long time ago, but they've actually taken on the role on board and took you on board, and you brought that change. And to me, that's so important for companies to wake up and understand that there is a need for us to change. The world is not as it was once upon a time where we all had separate roles. Everyone's now interchanging and working together. It's about raising awareness and changing perception, changing the way we do things. You're having a different mindset to enable that accessibility, make sure everybody from diverse background to be able to enjoy being in employment or being in a place where they feel safe enough to move around in a free way itself. So I applaud you, Sheri, for what you're doing and what you've achieved and what you're shouting out, because there's so many companies, and not just in the US, in the UK, but across the world, that need to wake up to the idea that we do need accessibility within the workplace, but also in our community as a whole, wherever you are.
Yeah, community is really, really important to VMware. So not only do I work on external products and internal stuff, I also work with our vendors. So, and when our vendors make accessibility improvements that we've requested, that we've worked with them on, everybody who uses that software benefits. It's not just, some specific feature that they're putting in that only goes into VMware's version. I also work on 3 of the standards organizations that are deciding what the next generation of accessibility requirements are going to be. But you don't have to have VMware's bank account to make a dent in accessibility. I actually have an article, I'll send you the link later, called Accessibility on a Shoestring Budget. And it's things that startups and very small companies that have significant financial constraints, small steps that they can make that will lead to improved accessibility in their product without having to write, some big 6-figure check.
And do please send me the link, because I think in a way, the more we raise awareness of what's possible, the more people start sitting up and start making those changes within their own environment, within their workplace. Because sometimes you're right, people are concerned about how much is it going to cost me, how long is it going to take me to do this. But if you're saying that it's you don't have to spend so much to make that difference, then hey, why don't we start investing and start looking at a way to make it more an inclusive environment for everyone to work in. Thanks for the link.
Multitasking for the win.
Yeah.
So high impact accessibility on a budget is the name of the article.
Okay, no problem. I'll definitely get that, and I'll share it as well. Yeah. So thank you so much for that. So just based on what you're doing, and now looking into the future, looking at also young people as well, what should they also be thinking about? Because we want to project not just for us as we are now, but we're looking at the future generation, looking at how we want to change, get them start thinking out of the box. Sometimes we pick up on what everybody else is doing and we don't change, whereas we want them to start thinking, hold it, every time I move forward, every time I do something, I have to be considerate of other people, or maybe the things that, as you're saying, not every disability is visual. There are those that we're not aware of. What would you say, or give us just 2 or 3 recommendations, things that we need to take on board now, but also for the future generation as well. All the things you would like to see happening, the changes that we start implementing in our minds, changing the mindset, but also in tangible ways as well.
So 2 things I'll highlight. One is you will not find a person born after the year 2000 that doesn't know somebody who's neurodiverse. Okay, neurodiversity, used to be a 1 in 250 diagnosis, and now it's a 1 in 54 diagnosis. And there's some overlap between neurodiversity and disability. Some neurodiverse conditions are significant enough that they are considered disabling. But many of them are not, and it's just a different way of thinking and a different way of interacting and a different way of processing data. So it's important to understand the impact of neurodiversity in the workplace, and that's something that's going to be more and more critical as those 20-somethings start to enter the workforce. So that would be number 1. That's social. Okay, now on the legal side, the European Accessibility Act is taking effect in the summer of 2025. So we're like 27-ish months away from that becoming official, the law of the land. So that's the main EU. Now the UK adopted the previous version of the European accessibility law before Brexit. So there's still a standing accessibility law in England, which may evolve over time to match the EU law. But the EU law will definitely broaden in 2025. It makes accessibility an outstanding career choice for people, because there's going to be more and more need for people who understand digital accessibility, especially on the technology side. When that law kicks in and all of a sudden everybody goes, oh my God, we have to meet this new law, even though the law has been pending for like 5 years. It's of course going to be a surprise to a number of people. So I would say, in terms of looking towards the future, those are 2 very strong indicators of things that are pretty much guaranteed to happen.
Indeed. Thank you so much. I'm so grateful that you came on this platform, because again, our aim is to educate, to raise awareness and change perception. And this is what you've done. This is what you are doing. And you're not just doing it in your company, your small environment, but it's actually a global thing. And you speak a lot on your own panels discussing accessibility. And to me, I think it's so important that we as human beings, we need to be sensitive to other people, what's going on around them, because not everyone can fit in the way we would like them to fit in. It's being sensitive to their needs and knowing what can I do to make that difference in that person's environment, in that person's life. If I put this in place, will that make them more comfortable so they can then be more effective and more productive? And I think that's so important. And this is what you're doing, Sharon.
I mean, it even ties into sustainability. Everybody's worried. Lots of people are worried about climate change. I can't say everybody, but many people are.
Okay.
And if you look at the 17 United Nations Sustainability Development Goals, half of them are either about disability or impact people with disabilities more than they impact people without disabilities. And we're never going to be a sustainable society unless we take care of the 1/6 of people, like you said, that are mismatched with their environment. That what they need isn't what they're getting.
So true. So true. You know what? I'm so impressed with you, and I thank you so much for coming on this platform. I think this is so important. The information you've given today, what you've spoken about, will resonate with so many people who want to be that difference, that positive difference within their environment. And just what you, the recommendations and examples of what's happening, what they're doing in the US, and what you have done, based in combining technology or the technical, understanding the technical background, the skills that's required, but also the legal requirement as well. It's not even about legal, it's just about common sense, being sensitive and being aware of people and showcasing that, and also understanding the needs of people who have disabilities, those that are visible and those that are non-visible as well. And it's just raising that people's awareness that, hold on a minute, not everybody sitting next to me is actually what I think they are. So let me just be, if they're not doing what I expect them to do, maybe there's something that I should be aware of. Let's start a conversation. And that's what we're doing today. Having a conversation about the things that we need to, it should be an everyday thing where we just be more comfortable with one another and make it more inclusive for our community as a whole. So thank you so much, Sheri, for coming on board. I know you're quite busy and I know you're like dotting all over the place, but I'm so grateful for you to come on board on this platform. So again, thank you very much.
Appreciate the invite. Thanks, Margaret. People can reach out to me on LinkedIn. I'm always willing to have a conversation with people who want to get on the path to better accessibility.
Wonderful. You know what? We want people, so who listened to this podcast, please do get in contact with Sheri, because what she has, that she just gives so much.
I'm not hard to find. I'm the only Byrne-Haber on the planet that works in technology. I have one daughter with the same last name, but she works in she's still a college student.
Oh well, but you know what? Again, people will listen. I'll also put a link on the contacts so that they'll be able to contact you as well. So thank you so much again. I really appreciate you for coming on board. Again, no problem. Thank you again, everyone. So please do listen to this podcast and please share with your network, because we want to be that difference. We want to make that positive difference. And Sheri is a prime example of making that difference, not just for herself or her family unit, but also globally as well. And it's great work she's doing. So we need to give a damn about each other, give a damn about accessibility. So please do read her book as well. Thank you very much.
Thanks.